who is Christian Kmeyer. And he has been working on the web since 1993, he wanted me to say, but I think he's an industry expert. So with that said, I'd like to introduce Christian.
Yeah, just to quickly expand on that, in '93 I was an engineer, ultimately went to law school. After law school, joined one of the first internet service providers as their general counsel, which tells you we were selling dial-up services at the time. We got very lucky to sell the company at the height of the .com, promptly retired from the law and left Europe, hence the accent, to move here 22 years ago. I actually used to live a decade right here next door before I moved to Newport Beach, where I am now. Today I'm running a venture fund in what people call the blockchain space. And anybody here doesn't have a frame of reference why I use the term non-player character, as in anybody doesn't play video games, has never played video games? No, no one? Everybody's good. Okay, right. Anyway, quick view on where we are now. So in the 90s, we created AOL. I remember AOL before there was a basic client for that, and my first AOL bill, when it was still metered, was $550 or something, which was a third of what I was making back then. Eventually we created something like a browser, hence the Netscape moment. And then we created Bitcoin, then Ethereum, and then we had the Coinbase moment. But really, this little guy here down in that corner is really where we are. This is the number of people that currently hold a wallet and can participate in something that we call today Web3, which is a term that we've been using on and off for 20 years. I wrote my first post-mortem on a metaverse investment in 2001, and I have a $6 million video to show for that. So, which is to say we are very, very early. So I'm going to start out apparently with DAO, so I have to apologize. I typically shuffle these slides. I've been giving a version of this talk since 2008 when I sold my last company and realized that we actually never built the web. I'll talk about this some more. So what's wrong with companies? So they are the current paradigm of building and creating capital formation. You have a bunch of different people involved in that. They all have different interests and they are largely not aligned. Employees typically want to make the highest salaries that they can, and ultimately the company wants to increase shareholder value. And we have a solution to that right now that we call it the DAO, which is probably the most important primitive introduced by the Bitcoin white paper. By the way, I talk so fast because I typically give talks on every one of these slides for about an hour. So I'm trying to keep this really, really short. So the DAO is great because there you actually have to participate in the network. Your interests are aligned. In order to participate, you have to either run a node or hold a coin. Coins are different from tokens. They are the original mining reward, whereas token is basically an API function, a standardized smart contract built on someone else's network. And apparently I have this slide twice. Huh, okay. All right, so just briefly to compare the two structures. So you have a legacy company like JP Morgan Chase with 250,000 employees apparently, and you got the Bitcoin network with maybe a dozen or so core developers. The market caps, please ignore, obviously constantly change. Right now, Bitcoin market cap is around $500 million or something, whatever it is. Really doesn't matter, to be honest. Larger point there being, though, so whenever you have these comparisons of these particular organizations, you will realize that one is more efficient than the other, right? To simplify this massively, again, I talk about this separately for an hour. Let's not do this today. So roughly, and all slides by definition, all graphs by definitions are sort of wrong, sort of apples to oranges, but the way I like to divide this as in we came from a pre-digital area where we used to mitigate commercial activity using papers and file folders, and then we invented databases in the 60s, and then we made a big mistake by connecting these databases to networks. Databases were not designed to be connected to networks, and that has a lot of externalities, and that is ultimately what decentralized software solutions, blockchain being one example of those, not the most important example, are here to solve. What do blockchains solve for? They solve for the database problem. A blockchain transfers the rights, the control over bytes from A to B. That's it. If you want to call those bytes bitcoins or your passport or US dollars, it doesn't matter to the bytes. That discussion over stable coins, utility tokens, is about as relevant as whether bytes should be blue or green or red. It doesn't matter whatsoever. All right, so this is the tech stack. Again, we have a lot of unhelpful labels in that space and metaphors like layers and other sorts of things. Most of them are very unhelpful. So the bottom layer, let's call it that for this particular talk, here is our legacy network layer of TCP/IP, SMTP, voice over IP. Then we have a kind of a blockchain layer on top of that with, oh, by the way, as a disclosure, most of these companies are part of our portfolio. And then we have a lot of things in the beginning stages that haven't been fully developed yet. So today, nothing is decentralized. Everything is centralized in some way or another. So we need decentralized compute, we need decentralized addresses, we need decentralized bandwidth, we need a lot of decentralization components that simply don't exist or exist in their infancies, and that's what you see here. So on top of that, and that's the most important layer, we have the application layer, right? So people didn't adopt voice over IP. They adopted Skype, they adopted WhatsApp. So these are the important layers. So please don't say nonsense like blockchain adoption, cryptocurrency adoption, NFT adoption. These are primitives. People adopt solutions, they adopt applications. That's the important level. And as we saw right now, what people adopt are wallets. And wallets are really browsers. And right now, they really only custody certain types of tokens and coins. All right, so the reason why I'm showing you a Jaguar here is because that's a reference that people get wrong all the time. So blockchains, for example, are not protocols, they're applications. The reasons why they are not protocols is because if I tell you I saw a Jaguar in the parking lot, that's probably an image you have in your mind. If I told you that I saw a Jaguar in the prairie, that's probably in your mind. Context matters. So blockchains exist in the context of network technologies. So one thing that probably everybody has been using at one point or another is this particular company, or now it's actually a subsidiary of a larger company called Alphabet. And literally the company website is at abc.xyz now. And larger point there being though, this is not a search engine. You keep referring to this as a search engine, it's not. It's a company that sells social engineering as a service to anybody who pays for that. And as an externality, if you're using Google, you're not on the web. You're interacting with one for-profit company that socially engineers you based on the overriding algorithm that they showed you earlier, increasing shareholder value. Obviously, Google doesn't care if you're buying that particular eyeball in order to sell something useless or convince someone to not vote or do something else. So this is who you are right now. You have several personas. Personas is the data that you control on the network, and then there's many, many profiles. Profiles are the data that the platform has on you, which includes your persona, as well as the data that it collects and buys in order to influence your behavior. You are not an agent. You're a non-player character in a game called Google, or in a game called Facebook, in a game called whatever. You're not on the World Wide Web. We haven't built the World Wide Web yet. So to point out some obvious mistakes from yesterday, I can't address all of that. I've been talking about this topic for so long already. So blockchain technology is not the same as blockchain. It's like confusing the internet and internet technology. So specifically, blockchain technology is referenced, even though not mentioned with that term, in the second footnote of the Bitcoin white paper. It's a paper actually written earlier about a particular type of encryption 10 years before that. Blockchains are also not databases. I forgot who said this. They're kind of the opposite. They solve for the problem that are databases. Right? So don't ever say blockchains are a type of database. So why do I show you this slide? Because the externalities that I referred to earlier of blockchain, of database solutions are atrocious. Cybercrime last year, as measured by GDP, would have been the third largest country. $6 trillion in cybercrime last year. The main reason for that is social engineering, as in I convince you to give me access to something, and if that access to something includes a database with other people's records, I get also access to that. So the second level of that is database solutions. So to implement mapped cryptographic primitives, that's my term, is not optional, it's mandatory, because on this particular trajectory, we're going to reach levels of like 15 trillion by 2025. So again, not optional. I have a separate working group where we will invalidate data broker models. We have 1,500 companies, which includes Google, Facebook, Equifax, which we will invalidate in the next 5 to 10 years. We will invalidate their business model. They should have never existed. People like Mark Zuckerberg, Sergey Brin belong in prison for life. All right, so the only reason why you should deploy a blockchain-based solution, the correct term is decentralized software solution, blockchain being one example of decentralized software solution, is to build this particular thing, a digital vending machine. That's a term that Nick Szabo created. A vending machine is great because you can take your token, you put it in there, you turn the dial, and your gum comes out or whatever you want to buy. And that's basically what Bitcoin is. So then we have more complex digital vending machine. This is Ethereum, which lets you sell other products and services. But again, it's an application. It's not a layer, it's not a network, it's an application. You only use it to transfer the control from bytes from A to B. That's it, there's no more. All right, so briefly, funny things like OpenSea sell NFTs. NFTs are a very important concept, but obviously not, I should say, for digital collectibles. There's only so many digital collectibles that people want to buy and so many people that want to buy them. Larger point there is right now, for example, 47% of all supply chain data is wrong. That's why you go to a store and they tell you, yeah, it should be on the shelf, but it's not there, because most of the data don't have integrity to them because they've been transferred from one database to another, oftentimes still using paper. So that's why this is how it looks today. I come up with a product, I borrow some money, I create some wine, and then ultimately I hand it over from one database to another, and then eventually you pick it up at the store and you get a receipt for it, but the receipt doesn't have any metadata, doesn't tell you anything about where this thing came from, how many there are, and so forth. So the idea of a supply chain in the future, we all made investments in companies like that, is I create a digital clone for anything in the real world first, and then I start handing over that digital clone, and it attaches all the metadata along the way, handing it over from one blockchain to another, keeps data integrity, and ultimately hands you the NFT to the wine bottle that you're buying. You see exactly this is what you're buying, this is where it came from. And more importantly, all of a sudden I can also create futures markets that are purely digital, that refer to individual items. Again, sorry for speaking so fast. I usually speak about that topic for an hour. So you'll find a lot of these concepts that I've been talking about on the web. I've been speaking about the decentralization of the web for 14 years. I started this in 2008. You find the discussion group on Facebook, ironically, where we started to talk about that. But I usually write an article for Forbes every couple of months. The longer versions on Hacker Noon. We talk about the decentralization of money. And did I keep my time? Did I talk fast enough? All right, I can keep going, or we can do Q&A, so whatever.